Canadian U-boats. I couldn't believe it myself when I saw it, but apparently the Royal Canadian Navy had two. Granted, for a very short time period following Germany's surrender after World War II, but they still did. So, in today's episode of let's go over the two Canadian U-boats, Type 19C/40 U-190 and U-889. This is not a history video, as per usual, and I use the term Canadian U-boats loosely since they were commissioned into Canadian service, even though they were not built for Canada, and for most of their lives weren't Canadian at all. I will try to use as many photos as possible, but I may not find too many of each. So photos may be repeated, and for context, I may use pictures of others of the same class just to help fill it out. Now, onto the older of the two, the U-190. The first Canadian U-boat on this list is U-190. She was ordered by the German Navy on November 4th, 1940 as yard number 1036, or 1036, whichever you prefer. Laid down on October 7th, 1941, launched on June 8th, 1942, and commissioned on September 24th, 1942. She would survive the war and was surrendered to the Royal Canadian Navy on May 14th, 1945. During her 6 war patrols, she sank only 2 ships, 1 civilian and 1 naval ship. On March 8th, 1943, she sunk the Empire Lakeland, who had fallen behind from her convoy. She went down with all 62 crew. Her second and final victim was sunk on April 16th, 1945, just under a month shy until her surrender. And that warship was a Vanguard-class minesweeper, and the last Canadian warship sunk in service, HMCS Esquimalt, taking 8 men down with her. She sank so quickly, no distress message was sent. Another 44 would eventually die from exposure before rescue arrived 8 hours later, leaving only 26 survivors, picked up by sister ship HMCS Sarnia, who then proceeded to try and fail to sink U-190. U-190 was commissioned into the Royal Canadian Navy on May 18, 1945, and served as an anti-submarine training vessel for the next year and a half, being decommissioned on July 24, 1947. She would eventually be sunk as a target on October 21, 1947. However, they didn't just choose a random range or random section of the ocean to sink her in. She was sunk in the same area that she sank Esquimalt over 2 years before. Now, you would think there's nothing left of her preserved. After all, why would they preserve anything? Well, while it might be a tiny amount, 2 items survive. Her ensign survives along with her periscope. I have no idea where the ensign currently is, but I do know her periscope is at the Crow's Nest Officers Club in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador. U-190 was by far the longest serving Canadian U-boat, both in German service and in Canadian. But what happened to her younger sister, who was in fact commissioned into the Royal Canadian Navy 4 days before the U-190? The youngest and final Canadian U-boat on this list, of course, is the U-889, who was ordered on April 2nd, 1942 as yard number 1097 or 1097, again, whichever you prefer. She was laid down on September 13th, 1943, launched on April 5th, 1944, and commissioned on August 4th, 1944. She was sent on 2 war patrols and sank no ships. She surrendered on May 13th, 1945, a day before her older sister. She was commissioned into the Royal Canadian Navy on May 14th, 1945, the same day her sister surrendered. She'd be decommissioned in December of 1945 and transferred to America, as the USA was allocated 10 U-boats as part of the Tripartite Naval Commission in November 1945, U-889 being one of these 10 U-boats. The US would proceed to conduct experiments on her hydrophone gear and eventually sunk her as a target, just like the U-190, this time off Cape Cod on November 20th, 1947, a month minus a day after her older sister, joining the many, many, many U-boats already under the waves. Both the U-190 and the U-889 had very short lives in Canadian service, and both were sunk as targets. U-190 by Canada and U-889 by America. But they still served in Canada, which, for no matter how short of a time, is still fascinating to me. Yes, after World War II, it wasn't uncommon at all for German naval vessels, at least the ones that survived, to be used in various different ways. Some went to other navies to continue regular service, and others were used for research, like U-889 with her hydrophone for America, and others were used for weapons testing, and some as just plain old targets. But that does not take away the fact that it is a very unknown part of the Royal Canadian Navy's history. I only found out about it by bumbling into it. I didn't even mean to, and I frankly don't remember how I did it. It's a very obscure fact in the Royal Canadian Navy's history. And, well, yes, they were enemies, especially the U-190 for sinking a Canadian ship. The U-190 and the U-889 still deserve to be remembered as the two sole Canadian U-boats.